Before we start this video, just want to put some trigger warnings for slight body horror and entomophobia insects. And also spoilers for the game Portal 2, but no spoilers for anything else. Remember when you were a kid, and you'd be watching TV or a movie, and sometimes there'd be that one thing that would scare you so much, you'd never want to watch that thing again? Maybe a specific scene or character, or maybe the thing you were watching wasn't for kids, and you saw something you weren't supposed to. That's what people on the internet like to call childhood trauma. Well, not the real definition. It's a YouTube tradition that's been going around for years at this point, where people recall the things in media that scared them at a young age. This year we're talking about my own childhood trauma. This is actually part 2 of an ongoing series, so if you haven't seen that one yet, I'd recommend you give it a watch. Now, this video is going to cover a specific era, where I was watching TV, playing games, all that, but not on the internet yet. A lot of the media here is stuff you guys probably recognize from the 2000s and 2010s, but there are some weird little exceptions. That being said, you probably know how this kind of video works, so let's get into it. SpongeBob! You already know what we're talking about. With this show, I think Twitter user I'm Normal Now said it best. SpongeBob episodes be silly as hell and then have one shot like this. Because that really was the case. Some episodes would just be wacky shenanigans with SpongeBob and the gang, but then you see this, or Tom Kenny's IRL face on a drop of hot sauce. Those 3 specifically. I remember being scared of those, but the one big one that everybody talks about was the episode Wormy. If you already know, you already know. So in this one, Sandy has SpongeBob and Patrick take care of this caterpillar named Wormy. Everything seems fine until it turns into a butterfly, which they do. The two have no idea what this is, and they freak out, thinking it's some sort of monster that ate the caterpillar. Hijinks ensue, and then, honestly, I don't remember what happens after the initial reveal of the butterfly. You know why? Because whenever they show it, they have a close-up of a real-life horsefly. Yeah, not even a monarch butterfly, like what it's actually portrayed as. Even if I was okay with bugs, this was so unexpected at the time for me that I never saw this episode in full again. We had to turn it off. And the thing is too, it wasn't even a one-off. Wormy's gross face shows up at least 3 times in the episode, so it's not a single scene that freaked me out. And yeah, Wormy, SpongeBob, a very predictable childhood trauma thing, but we're gonna get one more predictable thing out of the way: Courage the Cowardly Dog. Now, this show had a general horror vibe to it, so obviously, there'd be a lot of specific scenes and episodes that got to people as kids. Freaky Fred, the violin girl, return the sled. Thankfully, I never saw any of those episodes as a kid. The one I got stuck with was perfect. In this one, the titular character, Courage, gets berated by this old, rancid, shriveled up teacher character about how he's not quote-unquote perfect. It's a pretty nice message about how you should be yourself, but that's not what I took away from this episode. So in one scene, Courage has a nightmare, which, I kid you not, is just a cut to a 10-second scene of this thing going, "You're not perfect," while the music tenses up for no reason. It's literally a jump scare. No transition into it or anything. I don't really need to explain why it scared me. I have a specific memory of being at my grandma's house the night after I saw this, not being able to sleep because I just picture this thing coming into our room. With a lot of my childhood scares, I can confidently say they're not as bad as they were to me back then, but with this episode, it's, a little creepy. And let's stick with Cartoon Network for a bit. Back then, there was a time I straight up wasn't allowed to watch it, so it felt like this super edgy channel that only cool kids watch. That, and the branding was all black and white. They had mad, destroy, build, destroy, cool shows. They said crap and piss on regular show. It was hardcore. So I of course ate up all the stuff on there, like Adventure Time, which did have its fair share of creepy moments. Gumball had some weird stuff, but nothing that stuck with me. But Mad, the animation in this show in general was pretty uncanny. None of it got to me though, except for one specific sketch, but we need to just explain what Mad is, for those who don't know. This was one you just had to be there for. If you like dated early 2010s pop culture references, this show's for you. This was a sketch comedy show that mixed together popular movies or TV shows, or sometimes just did random nonsense. like I said before, it's dated, but there is a charm to it. Most of their pop culture mashup things weren't that creative. It would usually be a dumb pun that they based the skit around, like Taylor Swift mixed with the Swiffer mop. She's called Taylor Swiffer. Now, one of these was Coraline, but with Dora characters, so it's Doraline, huh? Now, I knew what Coraline was, but at this point in my life, I hadn't actually seen it. If I had, I actually think I would have really liked it, but this skit, aw, man. The stop-motion style, combined with them trying to copy the movie's atmosphere and creepy plot about Dora getting her eyes taken out, it rubbed me the wrong way. Also, Mad TV, it's a different show, I know, had this Davy and Goliath parody where the dog's face gets all creepy for a second, and that messed with me too, but I saw that when I was way older. But, you know, it's mad related, so I figure I'd throw that in there. Now, for the most part, I didn't really have any problems with stop-motion stuff. Like, I was able to watch Wallace and Gromit and all that, but sometimes, Now, when I was younger, we'd go to the movies a lot, and back in 2012, they'd play trailers for this movie, Pirates Band of Misfits. This is another one like Coraline that if I actually saw it as a kid, I think I really would have liked it. The designs didn't bother me at all, they were just silly looking guys. So, you know, looked like a fun movie. But one character, Queen Victoria, for some reason really freaked me out. To the point where I was screaming in the theater, like, And then we'd watch Rio. That movie slapped. I don't even know why I thought this character specifically was so scary. Maybe how aggressive she was, her weird face, big eyes. I think this is only the case with me. Was anybody else specifically scared of this one character from this innocuous pirate movie? I don't know. I just remember going to the theater around that time and having to close my eyes just in case that trailer came up. I was so scared of this lady. And I think something similar happened with the movie Arrietty by Ghibli. There was a freaky old lady in that, I think. And sorry if I'm gonna derail the video, these are pretty unscripted actually. If we're talking about scary things in movie theaters, I have to bring up the Dolby All Around You ad. You know the one. The one that goes, all around you. But back to Pirates. Again, the rest of the movie looks like a lot of fun, except for her. So not only would the trailer play in movie theaters, but also you'd have TV spots on TV. The only channel that those wouldn't air on was Disney Channel, so I couldn't watch Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network for the good part of a few months maybe. As you'd imagine, it wasn't very fun having to change from my favorite channel all the time. Well, favorite channel during the morning and afternoon. You see, in the middle of the day on Cartoon Network, all they'd play is Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry, and I did not like that at all. Not that it was scary, but just boring. Well, I get that they're classics, and I should have some reverence for them. It wasn't what a 7-year-old me wanted to see during a sick day. All day. Especially since I remember seeing the same episodes repeated a few times, like that Tom and Jerry one where Jerry paints himself white and pretends to be a ghost. Yeah, that's the next trauma thing. The theremin music in this one really got to me, especially how silent it is. This one just had a really creepy atmosphere to it at certain parts. Creepy music goes a long way. Let's circle back to Cartoon Network one last time. There were days where I would wake up early, like really early. Around 4 or 5. Obviously, when I turned into Cartoon Network around that time, I'd end up on Adult Swim. And this is where I'd see things I wasn't supposed to, like Tim and Eric, Aqua Teen, among others. I remember, again, like Courage at my grandma's house, a few days in a row, I caught this weird show that at the time kind of looked like Pokemon to me. It was about this guy and this girl, and the guy wore like a red robe and had cat ears, and the girl had a gem inside her or something. For the life of me, I cannot remember what their names were. Yeah, so one of my first exposures to anime was Inuyasha, which would come on what I presume to be Adult Swim's Toonami block. In terms of anime a young kid could be watching, it wasn't the worst. There wasn't any gratuitous sex or violence, and when it was violent, it would all be fantasy stuff, so nothing traumatic to me. There were 2 episodes though that were pretty scary just because of their concept. First was the one with the ancient no mask. Just this big goopy thing that would devour people, and that face wasn't okay to me. And I remember that specific scene of the grandpa on the hospital bed or something repeating, "Beware the flesh-eating mask." It's a cliche thing to say, but that shocked me to my core. And yeah, the rest of the episode wasn't any better with this all-consuming smooze guy running about. Next was the episode with the ghost girl. Her being unwillingly dragged into the afterlife wasn't a good thought, and the fact that she would be taken by this big thing didn't make it any better. Are we done with Cartoon Network now, besides the one episode of Teen Titans Go where Robin gets old and dies? I think we're pretty much good. Now, let's move on to Disney Channel. And this is a weird thing to say, but there were 3 specific instances of different shows and stuff on Disney Channel that had weird, uncanny shadow puppets. 3 different things. So let's get into that. Back in the day, Disney would have these live-action interstitials, stuff like This Is Me, Pass the Plate, all those. A big theme was learning about other cultures. Now, I don't know what this specific one I saw was a part of. Maybe This Is Me? This one talks about how his parents put on these shadow puppet shows in a traditional Japanese style. Since these were shadow puppets, the room would obviously have to be dark, and coupled with the sound effects, it did creep me out a little. Not freaked me out, but was just weird. I can't find this specific one on YouTube, so for all I know, that one could be lost media. Since this was Disney, you'd have a lot of commercials advertising for Disney products, movies, theme parks, and even musicals. They'd air this one interstitial about the Lion King Broadway show. For some reason, there was this one shot where instead of having Timon be on stage, they'd have this weird puppet thing where it was a full-body shadow puppet behind a thing. It looked so weird and unnatural. Like, just get the actual guy, and you could see the thing's limbs all being manipulated. Ugh. And one more thing, similar to that from Disney around the same time, was on Ant Farm. Now, this was the one episode where all the characters go to Australia, and the one nerd kid ends up riding an emu, but they only show his silhouette. I don't know, something about having a human shadow but moving it all weird falls directly into the uncanny valley. Compared to Nick and Cartoon Network, Disney had it pretty easy. The creepiest thing was weird moving puppets. But wait, you gotta remember the Fooglies from Spy Kids. You see, when I was younger, I genuinely thought that the Spy Kids movies were Disney Channel originals, just solely based on how much they'd air on there. Also, the CGI wasn't great, which made me think that too. DComs never had the best CGI either, so until pretty recently, I just thought these were Disney productions. For those who don't know, Spy Kids was a trilogy of live-action family movies directed by the famed Robert Rodriguez. I'm not even gonna say what it was about because by the title, you can probably tell. The second and third ones were pretty fun, though I barely remember anything about the second except for that one quote about God. You gotta go with the first one. It's the original. In that one, the main characters watch this TV show that's a parody of Teletubbies. Maybe. Mascots are these weird, deformed guys that speak in this high-pitched, backwards language. Now, they were already creepy on their own, but later, they find out that these guys are actually real people, that the bad guy transformed into these deformed guys. And all the funny backwards talk that the kids have been hearing is actually them crying for help. Dude, for real. That's the plot of this movie. And you know what? It's even more scary now when I think about it as an adult. Imagine being turned into a monster against your will, and having to perform on a kid's show ran by Nightcrawler from X-Men. It's just such an awful fate. I hate thinking about it. In the last video, I talked about a certain piece of media that scared me as a kid, and how for the longest time, I had no idea what it was or where to find it. This is a similar story. Now, this was when I was in the first grade. I was watching TV on one of the grown-up channels, probably the CW. There was this TV show, or maybe it was a movie. It starts off with this kid watching some puppet show on TV, obviously meant to be a Sesame Street parody. It starts out normal, the puppet characters look like they're having a gay old time, until the main puppet starts talking directly to the kid, beckoning him to come closer and touch the screen of the TV. This goes on for a bit, and the kid does just that. Then he starts going limp like the TV sucked all the life force out of him, and you see him laying on the floor, and his mom comes by and she sees him lying there. Is this kid paralyzed? Dead? Trust me, I wasn't sticking around to find out. This was a 1-minute scene, but still, it was burned into my mind for years. The imagery of these evil puppets was so for me, but the idea of him talking through the screen, and presumably taking this kid's soul or something, just disturbing. I don't know what happened, if I turned it off right after or whatever, but it stuck with me. In fact, I thought the rest of what this actual movie or TV show was way worse than anything I could imagine. At the time, I had no exposure to adult horror media, so my juvenile ideas of these puppets actually just running around being evil couldn't actually be what was going on. There had to be something beyond my imagination level scary. But you know what, it turns out that's exactly what happened. You see, this was an episode of the TV show Angel, a particularly goofy one at that, where the main character turns into a puppet and fights evil puppets, and the whole gag, yes, gag, is that it's Sesame Street but evil. Our hero, Puppet Angel, still goes around and punches people like normal, but he's a puppet now, so it's all funny. And at the end, he and the evil Sesame gang get into a fight on the show set, and it's mostly played for laughs. Now, I wish I would have actually seen the full thing as a kid. This is far from what I was expecting. The moral of the story: face your fears. And speaking of scary puppets that I knew nothing about, remember Jeff Dunham? From what I know, this guy was a stand-up comedian slash ventriloquist who was somewhat popular in the 2000s. I never saw any of his specials or anything, but you know who I did see at Newberry Comics? This thing. This is Peanut, one of Jeff's most popular acts. I don't know, I had no idea where he came from, but this thing's design freaked me out. I'd see merchandise of him around, and I never wanted to look at any of it. It was this one fridge magnet specifically I remember seeing. And guys, don't laugh, but it kinda was the same thing with the troll face. Like, you know, I didn't know what it was, and without context, it would look a little creepy to a 7-year-old. I was a dumb kid. We all were. My dad read me the manual for the first Resident Evil game, and I thought it was real, okay? Yeah, shout out to my dad. Besides that, he actually introduced me to a lot of classic movies as a kid. A few of them which had some not-so-okay things in them. First, there was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, I was really young when I saw this, and by that time, I was really big into the LEGO Indiana Jones toys and the video game. So I thought, why not? This should be fun. It was violent and kind of boring at parts to little me, but it was cool. Most of it was spot on to the LEGO games, so, you know, you can't complain about that until the bad guys opened the Ark of the Covenant. I'm not going to take any risks and show it on YouTube, but we all know what happens. It's a really cool use of special effects, but it caught me so off guard. That was nothing like the LEGO game, where they had the dance party. I was by no means an 80s kid, but I did grow up with a lot of media from the before years. Not only Indiana Jones, but Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And this is one a lot of other people know, the scene where he gets in the truck and the lady's face goes all crazy for a frame. Yeah, jump scares were a big no-no for me, and still are, to be honest. I've never played a single Five Nights at Freddy's game just because I've never gotten over jump scares. But jump scares in movies, yeah. Scooby-Doo, Abracadabra-Doo had the Banshee, Shrek the Third had that one dream sequence, Polar Express had the Scrooge puppet, Fred 2, Night of the Living Fred had a jump scare in it, so when we want to watch the Fred movie, we only watch the first and third ones. Yeah, the third Fred movie is actually the best, I'll fight you on that. Of course, besides jump scares, there would just be things in movies that gave me an uneasy feeling. Those don't really count as trauma because, let me tell you, I wasn't lying awake in bed at night thinking about the allergic reaction scene from Meet the Robinsons, or the weird moon from Hugo. I love Hugo, actually. I need to watch that one again, along with Rio, but back to all the weird stuff my dad was showing me. Does anybody remember the movie The Time Bandits? I remember watching it when I was little, but I barely recall anything about it. Again, this isn't trauma, just some weird memories about a weird movie. I don't even want to say anything about it because I want to watch it completely blind again. From what I remember, it was about this kid laying in bed, and then a wormhole opens up, and this severed head talks to him, and I think there were plague doctors, maybe? And then the bad guys were covered in plastic wrap for no reason. Like I said, weird movie. Now, the Shrek Halloween special. Yes, really. In Scared Shrekless, Shrek and company go around telling scary stories, in like a Treehouse of Horror type deal. The middle story about Puss in Boots and Donkey isn't anything remarkable, but the other two were interesting. Well, not run out of the room scary, Bride of Gingy and the Shrexorcist did have some unsettling moments. Looking back on it now, I gotta say, these shorts are actually a lot of fun, especially the Shrexorcist, you know, once you understand all the references. Now, video games. I think when I wrote the first part of the series, I said there wasn't anything in a game that scared me after We Play. Yeah, I was little. Turns out I couldn't be more wrong, because how dare I forget early Minecraft. Now, who doesn't love Minecraft? For a lot of people, it's their first experience with an open-world sandbox game. To a young kid, Minecraft can be a world full of wonder, discovery, exploration. You can find, craft new items, build houses, mine, fish, farm. There was a sense of satisfaction in that game I hadn't experienced with anything before. Every in-game day brought something new, but every in-game night, you better sleep in that bed of yours or lock up your little wooden door because when those zombies and skeletons come out, you needed to hide. Since this was the only first-person game I played up until that point, a lot of the mob encounters would obviously be really intense, Stepping outside at night or going into a cave felt rewarding, yeah, but it was always scary. Things were lurking and creeping around every corner. The spiders were the worst for me. The sounds they made and the way they'd crawl up the walls. Endermen, the way they'd seize at you when you provoked them. And since it was such a big world, you'd be in danger all the time. It was nothing like I've ever played before. Nothing to this day matches that sense of panic that I would feel back then, whenever I'd be swarmed by a bunch of zombies, or have to flee for my life from some other hazard. Minecraft today is obviously bigger, with more stuff than ever, but I don't know. I feel like I've played it so much to the point where there's nothing new or exciting, and obviously nothing new or scary. Except for the phantoms. Like, what is with those? If you hate phantoms from Minecraft, please like the video, and subscribe, and donate to my Patreon. Now, another first-person game I played at that time was Portal 2. I wasn't good at it at all, but the main mechanic of the game was fun enough. The first one had some intense scenes, but I was old enough to get by those okay. 2 had more of an atmosphere and a bigger story, which I really enjoyed. There was one part near the beginning that always stuck out to me, just because of how much it creeped me out. In this one part, you go through some abandoned laboratory with all this graffiti. One of these has this creepy old drawing of this lady, next to what I think is GLaDOS. As a kid, I thought this was the player character, Shell, but it actually might be Carolyn, another character. The art style here is pretty similar to the Ratman comics that Valve made for the game, and those also freaked me out, but since I wasn't online by then, I didn't see them for a while. Either way, look at this lady. Ugh. And while we're on the topic of creepy drawings, I just have one more thing to mention for this part, because it's in my notes. As a kid, I had the VHS for Peter Pan, and on it there was this behind-the-scenes thing after the movie, and I remember being creeped out by it, but I can't remember what part of it exactly, maybe the concept art. Again, my notes for this video stretch back for years, so there's not a lot of info besides my memory. Let's get back on track. This video has been really disorganized so far, so for this last section, we're just gonna cover childhood trauma stuff from school. The US public education system. Good times. We're gonna start this section off with a bit of a deep cut. Did anybody else have Raz Kids at their school? razkids.com. Now, this was a website where you could read books online. There was the option to do it yourself, but I always did it with the narration on. It was pretty basic kids book stuff, simple little picture book, fiction and non-fiction. A lot of different topics too, like cryptids. Yes, really. Now, I don't know if it was cryptids exactly, they definitely didn't use that word, but it was something like unexplained phenomena. They had stuff like Bigfoot, UFOs, crop circles, probably a picture of a mermaid corpse or something. All crazy stuff that didn't really scare me, but it did put me on edge. I don't know. It was like that feeling I get now where I watch some creepy ARG YouTube video and then end up looking around just to see if anything's following me. It's that irrational sense where you don't think something's actually after you, but you're still tense, if that explanation makes sense. Don't worry, because I'm probably gonna explain it better in episode 3. Besides the cryptids book, there was one about special effects in movies. I did not enjoy looking at the screen grabs they had of the original King Kong and the skeleton they used to do the stop motion. Ugh. Even though those 2 books were creepy, they were the only ones I'd read on there. There was this morbid fascination I had, even though I'd get a little creeped out. Same thing would happen to me later in life when I'd be online, watching creepy cartoon theory videos, but that's a topic for a later day, as I said. And this was a story that wasn't on Raz Kids, but I have to mention, the story about the farmer who tries to kill the donkey by burying it alive, and it keeps stepping on the dirt. Being buried alive didn't seem that fun to me then, and still isn't now. I remember there was this trailer I saw on TV once, for some medieval fantasy movie maybe, that had a shot of a guy in a coffin. I to this day have no idea what that was. It was around 2011, I think, if that narrows it down. But enough about reading things in school, let's talk about something I watched. Pretty sure I was part of the last generation where they'd actually roll out the TV into the classroom. We'd do it for some good old Magic Bus, House Rock, or whatever other educational stuff the teacher wanted us to watch. I even remember we saw an episode of that Henry's Amazing Animal show that apparently was lost media. While a lot of people associate that classic wheelie TV with a relaxed good time, there was one holiday season where it was anything but. We all know the Nutcracker, right? A Christmas tradition and the most popular ballet of all time. Well, in 1992, the Jim Gamble Puppet Company decided to make their own adaptation, which looked like this. Yeah, it was pretty uneasy. While you do have to admire the skill that it takes to operate this type of marionette, I need to bring up the word uncanny again for how these guys look, especially when they're close up on a screen. If I had seen this live, it probably wouldn't have been creepy, but seeing this on a VHS tape in my 3rd grade music class gave me the creeps. The part every kid in the class got scared of was this belly dancer character who would come out, and there'd be this long stretch where you just see her and she's shaking really weird, and the slow music's playing, and look at her face. Not really the way I want to spend the days leading up to winter break. And not the thing I want to be thinking about while I'm laying in bed on Christmas Eve. While I know that people read books now, overall, reading was a bigger part of our lives back in elementary school. One can't forget the in-school fandoms for things like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or the infamous Warrior Cats. And don't get me started on that Scholastic Book Fair, oh my gosh. One of the books I remember from that time was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And this was a series of children's books that featured old folktales and urban legends. You may recognize it for these illustrations. Now, I never read anything from these in elementary school, but there was one chapter I heard about through word of mouth. The Ghost in the Mirror. Looking it up now, this wasn't really an actual story, I think, but the idea of it messed with me for a long time. Basically, this chapter just tells you about the old Bloody Mary game, and how you say a ghost's name 3 times in a mirror, in the dark, to summon it. I was young, so obviously I thought this was very real. I felt like I had this sort of forbidden knowledge once I found out about it. There was a lot of morbid curiosity surrounding it, to the point where I felt like I had to hold myself back from doing this stupid game. Because, you know, everybody has a bathroom with a mirror, and a light that they can turn off, and curtains or a window. It's not like I needed to go out at midnight and sacrifice a goat or anything. My ticket to getting unalived by a ghost was just there in my bathroom, and it was up to me to have the self-discipline to not do it, and to not let my curiosity get the better of me. It's like when you have a cut and you know you shouldn't pick at it, but you just want to. The whole thing drove me nuts for a while. I have a specific memory of talking with some other kids about it in the school library, and we were all throwing her name around like it was nothing, but somehow the teacher took me aside and told me to tone down my language. I wasn't even reading the book it came from, but okay. Obviously, the idea of saying something by summoning the name was really scary to young gullible me. Bloody Mary, and also Beetlejuice for some reason. I knew nothing about the movie, but I had seen the Angry Video Game Nerd video where he mentions the NES game, so I knew that he was a character. But to this day, I'm sorry, I've never actually tried to summon this old lady. And you know what? While we're at it too, I need to mention the Candyman. Never saw this movie when I was a kid, but it's a similar premise to the Bloody Mary myth. If you like horror movies and haven't seen this one, check it out. It's such a good watch, especially around this time of year. Now, just like Bloody Mary herself, there was another person that kids around school would talk about. Someone who I knew nothing about, yet the idea of them sent chills down my spine. It was an urban legend like none I'd ever heard about before. It wasn't a ghost, wasn't an animal, it was a man. A Slender Man. Yeah, we're getting into creepypasta territory. Now, fortunately, Slender Man wasn't a big thing at our school. Back then, it was incredibly weird if kids were going on the internet and finding creepy things. So this was only a few kids who mentioned the guy. From what I heard, that he was this big tall guy who comes and grabs kids, I was terrified. Little did I know that besides Slender, there was a whole new dimension of scares waiting for me on the World Wide Web. And that's where we end this video. Because trust me, with scary internet stuff from my childhood, there's gonna be a lot. But you know what? Thanks for watching this far. Hopefully you guys respond well to this different kind of video. Obviously, don't expect more of this after the next part, but if you like this, I really appreciate that. A special shout out to my actor supporters from Patreon. Knife Girl, The Blazing Pegasus, Technicolor, Jack Getchman, Paisley, Trixie Best, No, Yak Best, Olive, SR Nano, Allison Madden, Alex Kincaid, Johnny Punchfist, A Kawaii Dragon, Keaton Cryer, Cascadiark, Bad Bessie, Damian, Marshmallow, and Goose Nerd. I can't think of a better outro, so until next time, goodbye.